My name is Ahmed, and it is an absolute pleasure to moderate this important discussion with such a distinguished panel. Before we begin, I have a few important announcements. First, I want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available online for those who wish to revisit this discussion or share it with others. Secondly, I regret to inform you that Dr. Mohammad Nadeem Mirza, who was scheduled to join us today as a panelist, had to excuse himself at the last minute because he was feeling unwell. We wish him a speedy recovery. Additionally, Dr. Ahmed Waqas Waheed is also not feeling well. He has a serious flu and cough. But despite this, he was kind enough to still be with us today and contribute to the discussion. We truly appreciate his commitment and we hope he feels better soon. I would now like to take a moment to recognize the efforts of the main person, Dr. Mary Hunter, the author of this policy memo that forms the foundation of today's discussion. Dr. Hunter has spent the past 6 months in Pakistan as a visiting research fellow at the Center for Studying and Contemporary Research. Um, she conducted in-depth research on the cultural and political legacies of colonialism in UK-Pakistan relations. What makes Dr. Hunter's perspective particularly valuable is how deeply she engaged with different strata of society during her time in Pakistan. Her research was not just confined to academic spaces. She actively interacted with common people and scholars alike, gaining first-hand insights into how colonial legacies continue to shape everyday's life. Beyond her academic work, she was also active in outdoor activities, from running a half marathon in Islamabad to traveling across cities like Karachi and Lahore, further immersing herself in the country's cultural extensive work has now culminated in the publication in the form of this memo, Decolonization UK-Pakistan Cultural Relations, which is now officially available for download. We will share the direct download link in the Zoom chat. One of my colleagues will do that so that you can access it and follow along as we discuss the key themes. So, looking at British Pakistani relations through a decolonial lens is crucial because it allows us to critically examine the enduring structures and mindsets established by colonial rule and how they continue to shape um, cultural, educational, and political interactions between the two countries. Decolonialism is not just about revisiting theory, it is also about actively dismantling the colonial legacies that persist in institutions, policies, and social norms till date. One of the core aspects of decolonial thought is recognizing that the colonial influence did not end with the independence of Pakistan. So, British cultural and educational frameworks remain deeply embedded in Pakistan, influencing everything from the dominance of the English language to the structure of its education system to the structure of its governance system. So these elements create systemic inequalities where access to power, prestige, and opportunity is often linked to colonial era hierarchies. So, as Franz Fanon, a leading scholar on this leading scholar and activist, anti-colonial activist, he argued that decolonization is truly the creation of new men. He meant that it is not merely a political process, but a fundamental transformation of thought, identity, and power structures. Um, From our perspective, this means that examining UK-Pakistan relations through a decolonial perspective is not just theoretical, it also requires concrete action. It involves rethinking bilateral engagements, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, development policies to ensure that they do not reinforce historical imbalances, but instead promote a more equitable and reciprocal partnership. To help us unpack these critical issues, we have an exceptional panel of experts who have joined us today, each bringing a unique perspective on decolonization, international relations, and cultural studies. Uh, Foremost, we have Dr. Mary Hunter, a research fellow at CSCR. Uh, she holds both a Master of Theology and a doctorate from the University of St. Andrews, Scotland. Her research has explored Ziaul Huq's Islamization of Pakistan, its impact on religious minorities, and its links to British colonialism. Um, she has contributed extensively to think tanks and newspapers on topics such as Pakistan, Islamophobia, religious minorities, and she has examined the intersection of religion, politics, history, and law. Next up, we have Dr. Fatima Sajjad, Associate Professor and Director, Center for Critical Peace Studies, UMT Lahore. She holds a PhD in International Relations from Punjab University, an MPhil from Kennedy College, and an MSc from QAU Islamabad. As the founder of Pluriversity Lahore, a multilingual educational forum, her work challenges dominant knowledge structures in peace and security studies. Her research focuses on countering epistemic violence, combative decoloniality, and peace education based on autonomous knowledge systems. After that, we have Dr. Ahmed Waqas Waheed, who is the executive director of Rhodes Initiative and holds a PhD in political science from Queen Mary University of London. He has authored books such as The Wrong Ally, Pakistan State's Sovereignty Under US Dependence, and Constructing Pakistan Through Knowledge Production in International Relations and Area Studies. His research critically examines knowledge production in Pakistan, focusing on the way colonial frameworks continue to shape international relations in political thought. Before I open this discussion, we at the center, we wanted to be interactive and engaging. If any of the participants, the audience, have any questions during the talk, please feel free to put them in the chat box or use the raise hand feature. Once the panelists have concluded their initial remarks, we will open the floor for direct questions from the audience. So it's our honor that we have such a distinguished panel with us today to explore how decolonization can shape UK-Pakistan cultural relations. I encourage all of you in the audience to actively engage in the discussion. Please feel free to share your thoughts, and we'll try to address them in the Q&A session. Without further delay, let me first invite Dr. Mary Hunter to share her thoughts on her research, its key findings, and why decolonization remains a pressing issue in UK-Pakistan relations. Dr. Hunter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Talha. To everyone, hello and welcome. Assalamu alaikum or Khushamadeed. I'd just like to apologize in advance if there's any background noise. There is some construction going on in the building, but hopefully it won't be too disruptive. So I'd like to begin by firstly thanking the team at CSCR for hosting me during this fellowship in Pakistan, which, as Talha alluded to, has been an amazing and well-rounded experience. And they've allowed me to write on a variety of sensitive topics. And they're both a young and private think tank that plays a really important role in contributing to discussion and analysis on pressing issues in Pakistan and around the world. And when we were discussing what the central topic of my research would be during the fellowship, CSCR requested me to work on something that affects both Pakistan and the UK. And the issue of decolonisation quickly came to mind in light of increased discussion on it, both in academia and on the world stage. And before I go any further, I'd like to quickly define decolonisation. Formal decolonisation refers to the process of struggling for and gaining political and economic freedom from direct colonial rule. But of course, colonial legacies across the spectrum of society survive independence. And so a second form of decolonisation is dismantling those legacies that continue to exist. This includes within knowledge production, language, the content of and access to education, the laws and access to justice, infrastructure, and place names. Colonial legacies also exist at the level of ideas, and so a third form of decolonisation is acknowledging and challenging the ideas that underpinned and justified the colonial project, such as assumptions of Western superiority and Eurocentrism. There are several major reasons that render decolonisation significant in the context of UK-Pakistan relations specifically. Firstly, the British government says that it is committed to tackling many different kinds of inequality and injustice in Pakistan, but this should also extend to those inequalities and injustices perpetuated by British colonial legacies. Given how vast this discussion could be, I focus specifically on UK-Pakistan cultural relations. Cultural relations are defined by the British Council as transnational interactions through ideas, customs, and the arts to enhance dialogue and understanding. This therefore includes language and education as the medium for interaction and by which ideas are disseminated. And so I discuss the connection between the English language and British education with inequalities. Secondly, there is a conspicuous lack of discussion about decolonisation at the official level between Pakistan and the UK, while we see India having committed itself explicitly to the process, as well as a desire to have more discussion about issues like reparations for slavery and colonialism at the multilateral, particularly at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. This lack of discussion at the official UK-Pakistan level also does not reflect the increasing but not yet mainstream decolonial movement within Pakistani academia and the arts, which must be acknowledged. The recommendations contained in this policy memo are intended to facilitate the process of decolonisation in the cultural relations between the UK and Pakistan. In order to understand the nature and consequences of these relations, the ways in which they developed under the British colonial administration are laid out. And it's only with this understanding of the reason why British culture was originally promoted in the region that the importance of decolonisation can be appreciated, especially in light of ongoing colonial legacies and the accompanying injustices. These include the relationship between the English language and education with elitism, the perceived superiority of Western culture over non-Western culture, and the UK-Pakistan cultural relationship as primarily operating in one direction, from the UK into Pakistan rather than vice versa. The recommendations of this policy memo are intended for the British and Pakistani governments, cultural organisations, especially the British Council, and higher education institutions that collaborate in both countries. So through this policy memo, I sought to show how British culture, particularly English language and education, took root in the region and how it continues to contribute to inequality. This required looking back to the role of the British colonial administration in pre-partition India. Regarding the English language and education, I show how the colonial administration in the 1800s wanted to redirect its funds to educate Indians in English and not in indigenous languages, with the purpose of creating a class of interpreters who could therefore assist with the colonial project. Both indigenous languages and sources of law were dismissed as primitive and useless, whereas European literature and science were portrayed as inherently superior and valuable. Turning to modern-day Pakistan, English remains the language of the elite. English medium schools remain unaffordable for many, despite the requirements for English for higher clerical jobs and higher education. Language is therefore a barrier to particular jobs and forms of education. The British Council is, of course, a significant organisation with respect to the English language and education because of its programme to teach and hold examinations on and in the English language in Pakistan, presenting these as a chance at upward social mobility by facilitating study in the UK and other countries, as well as work. But the costs of examinations and exam verification are significant and are not affordable for much of the population, which therefore exacerbates class-based inequalities. There is also no doubt that the English language, British qualifications, culture, and educational institutions are promoted in Pakistan, whereas Urdu or other regional languages and Pakistani contributions to culture and education are not promoted to the same degree in the UK. The importance of including Pakistani culture within mainstream education and discourse in the UK is that it will help to tackle the unfortunate anti-Pakistani and Islamophobic sentiment across society and will facilitate the sizable British Pakistani community to relate more to their heritage. Besides language and education, I also discussed the issue of British development and aid in Pakistan, the projects of which also reflect cultural priorities. Since the gutting of US aid under the new Trump administration, scholars are once again scrutinizing aid, noting criticisms like how it perpetuates dependency and enables corruption. The British government has also just announced that it too will make significant cuts to aid funding from 0.5% of its GDP to 0.3% in favour of defence. But regarding decolonisation, it is disputed whether or not development is colonial or a colonial legacy. Some suggest not because it has a different history and is not imposed forcefully, while others would contend that if it is used as a means of coercion to encourage the recipient country to comply with the provider's foreign or strategic policies, then it should be perceived as a form of neocolonialism, especially because it represents the continuation from the colonial period of an unequal relationship. Both the British government and British Council are relevant stakeholders in this area, with the British government being one of the largest donors in overseas aid to Pakistan. While the two entities are separate, the British Council is an active participant in the UK's soft power efforts globally, and it has been interested in Pakistan's development since independence. While the terms of the UK-Pakistan development relationship have changed significantly since then, being described as in transition to a mutually beneficial partnership, I question to what extent the British government is tackling issues in the UK that are relevant to Pakistan, given its focus is mainly on issues within Pakistan itself. I believe a mutually beneficial partnership should involve the UK learning lessons from Pakistan and Pakistani culture, not just the other way around. Based on my analysis and findings, I make 6 recommendations, primarily for the British government, British higher education institutions, and the British Council. They are also relevant for the Pakistani government, the Higher Education Commission, and wider organisations involved in determining approaches to education, language, and the arts in Pakistan. These recommendations are not intended to be revolutionary, but hopefully practical and achievable changes that can be made in order to tackle inequalities and injustices in Pakistan that exist because of colonial legacies. Firstly, the British Council could host a conference with Pakistani scholars working on decolonisation to take the conversation forward. While Brits like myself have a role to play in this discussion, there are certain issues relating to decolonisation that are best articulated and formulated by Indigenous scholars and practitioners. Secondly, financial barriers to education or verification of qualifications should be removed or at least adjusted in light of average wages in Pakistan and thus what is affordable for a greater number of people. Thirdly, the British government and the British Council should fund research that allows British-Pakistani collaboration within humanities and the social sciences, particularly about how decolonisation can be enacted both in the UK and in Pakistan, and it should be co-led by British and Pakistani scholars. The projects under the British Council's PAC UK Education Gateway are currently more scientific in nature. Fourthly, the British and Pakistani governments and cultural organisations can help to fund the creation of Indigenous language academic journals that allow non-native English speakers more opportunities to be published and thus shape academia, such that they are not disadvantaged by being held to the same standards as native English speakers in English language academic journals. Fifthly, the British education system must acknowledge non-Western contributions to the arts, science, and human rights to challenge the idea that the West is the progenitor of culture and rights. This should include Pakistani and Indigenous language contributions, particularly because of the sizable British Pakistani diaspora, who should feel that their heritage is reflected within the education system. Finally, British government officials and representatives of cultural organisations should engage with their Pakistani counterparts in country using Urdu or other regional languages, rather than perpetuate the reliance on and dominance of English. In my policy memo, I outlined some implementation considerations, i.e. potential obstacles or arguments against the recommendations I've made, which I'll summarise now. Firstly, the recommendation to promote Indigenous languages in education might be perceived as unhelpful in terms of the UK's soft power strategies. But given the fact that the British government seeks to encourage equality in Pakistan for marginalised groups, it must also understand how the English language and British education promote inequality by exacerbating the divides between the elite and mainstream society. To strengthen Indigenous education and educational institutions could also help with the achievement of British development goals in Pakistan, such as improving the state of education, stability, and work opportunities. A stronger Pakistan is a more independent Pakistan. Secondly, the British government has often shied away from discussing issues related to decolonisation out of fear that it will have legal and financial implications it is not willing to meet, particularly reparatory justice for historic involvement in the slave trade. The consequence of this is an unwillingness to engage with such sensitive topics at the multilateral level, despite the demand among former colonised nations. An example of this was the 2024 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Despite Keir Starmer's government unequivocally stating that slavery reparations were not on the agenda and that they do not pay reparations, the leader's statement at the end of the summit said, and I quote, that the time has come for a meaningful, truthful, and respectful conversation towards forging a common future based on equity, end quote, with regards to the issue of reparative justice. The unwillingness on the part of the British government to have meaningful dialogue is not only unjust, but it will damage the UK's reputation on the international stage, and it will leave it lagging behind in international discourse. Given the sheer level of suffering caused by colonialism, it is not for the British to decide when the right moment is to move on or look to the future, rather than the past. Thirdly, these recommendations have financial implications for cultural organisations like the British Council, which also rely on non-governmental funding. It states that around 15% of its income is received from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, but around 85% is from teaching and exams, tendered contracts and partnerships. If the recommendation for lowering the cost of exam verification in line with average salaries in Pakistan is accepted, the British Council would obviously have to seek other sources of income to meet this specific deficit. This strikes at the heart of the issue of post-colonial and decolonial studies, insofar as it is suggested that economic concerns are a primary obstacle to decolonisation, as reflected in a reluctance to accept responsibility, lest it have financial implications. But this is where diversification of actors in the decolonisation process might come in. Other organisations or individuals can play a key role in the decolonisation process, either by funding small-scale initiatives in partnership with the British Council or independently, like scholarships or academic posts at educational institutions focused on decolonisation both in the UK and Pakistan. A particularly significant source of income for Pakistan is remittances, contributing to around 10% of the country's GDP. A higher figure than in South Asia generally. The UK is one of 3 key remittance sending partners to Pakistan, alongside Saudi Arabia and the US. Therefore, Pakistani diasporas around the world, particularly the one in the UK, have the resources to help with decolonial initiatives. Other implementation considerations include ascertaining what Indigenous languages, identities, education, and means of knowledge production should be encouraged, such as through collaborative educational initiatives with the UK. But this must be the task of Indigenous scholars. It is also key that decolonisation does not become a top-down process whereby an exclusivist identity is enforced upon Pakistanis. The country has witnessed this in the past, particularly through Zia-ul-Haq's Islamisation of Pakistan. Furthermore, the anti-Muslim attitudes of India's Modi-led government highlight the potential dangers of a decolonisation process that polarise the population along religious lines. These issues must be considered by any Indigenous scholars in Pakistan who are leading the way in these discussions. This is a good point to end my introductory remarks, as we'll be handing over to some excellent scholars who have worked on decolonial themes. They're exactly the kind of thinkers who should be engaged with if a decolonial conference or series of talks could be organized in Pakistan. And I appreciate them taking the time to participate today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, for your insightful presentation on the key themes of your research. So one of the striking aspects of your work is that it brings a much needed critical lens to the role of the British Council in Pakistan. This institution has operated in this country for decades, but has been rarely examined through a decolonial perspective. Despite its deep involvement in education, cultural exchange, and development initiatives, there have been little to no scrutiny of how its presence augments the colonial legacies, particularly in areas such as language dominance, knowledge production, and elite access to resources. This is me talking because I'm the product of the system myself. Anyhow, so to further enrich this discussion, I would now like to invite Dr. Fatima Sajjad to share her perspective on the policy memo and the broader topic of today's webinar. Dr. Fatima, given your extensive work in critical peace studies and decolonial thought, we would love to hear your reflections on the significance of this research and how it can contribute to the ongoing discourse on decolonization. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks to Dr. Mary Hunter and the host of this event. Thank you for the opportunity to express my thoughts on this very important line of work. So in the decolonial work, we emphasize that decolonizing is a verb. It's an action. It's not just talks or conferences or publications. It is an action. So in that sense, I'm happy to see that this memo is seeking an actual change on ground rather than just a publication. So this line of thinking, I congratulate Dr. Mary for working in this direction that matters most today. And I hope it can have some tangible results and outcomes as well. So having said this, since I'm a critic and you invited my thoughts today, so I will try to offer some of my thoughts as sincerely as possible. Keeping in view that decolonizing and decolonization is not a very simple task. It's very complex. So I'm going to talk about a few things, and there's a lot to unpack in this memo. Let me offer a few thoughts to continue this conversation. So when I saw the topic of the memo, I remembered Gandhi. When he was asked about the English civilization, his answer was that I think it would be a good idea. So I would say the same about decolonizing UK-Pakistan cultural relations. I think it would be a good idea. As much as I agree with the need and the intention behind this work, I think decolonizing relations between these two countries is not a possibility in the given situation. So I would be cautious to use the term decolonizing for UK-Pakistan cultural relations. We may call it something else. And let me try to explain this assertion. Let me ask you a question that Dr. Calilia Rodriguez, she challenges us to imagine. If I ask the question, who are you without colonialism? Let me ask UK, who are you without colonialism? And let me ask Pakistan, who are you without colonialism? So what we are trying to emphasize through such questioning is that our very identities and our existence are shaped by colonialism. It is who we are. We are and we remain a part and a product of colonialism. We have to begin by acknowledging this fact first. So we remain entangled in a system in which our identities are tied with coloniality. What we call Pakistan and what we call UK are two countries that are created and shaped by colonialism. Our sense of identity, our current physical shape, our boundaries, our borders, our political, economic, and epistemic structures are shaped by colonialism and the continuing coloniality. So, in addition to physical structures, our ways of thinking, being, feeling, knowing, sensing, imagining are all shaped by what we call coloniality. So, acknowledging this reality, I think what we can aim to do is to build less colonial relations. We can aim to have less colonial cultural relations between Pakistan and UK. And that's a good beginning, I think, because if we talk about decolonizing, decolonizing goes much deeper. Decolonizing entails undoing, and undoing the modern condition in which we find ourselves. And that's a lot to imagine and a lot to think about and a lot to unpack. So here are just a few sides of undoing if we intend to decolonize. One side of undoing is undoing the physical shape of the world, the current system of the world, the current structure of the world, the current borders in which we are divided is a construction of the Western world and the process through the process of colonization. So decolonizing is about creating a different world, a different kind of organizing the world. You just mentioned Fanon. Fanon explained that the colonial world is a world divided into compartments. Decolonizing entails decompartmentalization of the world. It's about creating a world where we can move about freely without borders, where we can remain connected to each other and our interests remain tied to each other. That's a very different world. And the current frameworks of knowledge and action place this line of thinking in the realm of utopia. There it belongs. If you talk about all these things, about the borderless world or the free world or not being divided in the way we are organized and divided, a lot of people would say that we are living in utopia or we are thinking it's a utopian mindset. So one of the things the modern condition and knowledge has done to us is erasing our options to imagine or create different possibilities. So this is what we must take into account when we are talking about decolonizing. It really limits our options to imagine differently. Another side of undoing is our own mind. In context of Pakistan, decolonizing work means a constant encounter with the captive mind. And captive mind, as conceptualized by Sayyid Hussain Alatas, is an uncritical mind which is all the time engaging in uncritical imitation of the West. And this is what we are doing in Pakistan most of the time. And the fact that we are talking about decolonizing and we are trying to catch up with the discourse which has been very active in the Western academia for quite some time now, and now we are catching up with that, not because we have recognized any need for that, but because this is something which is now a very big buzzword for quite some time in the Western universities. So we would like to catch up from there. So this general tendency of imitating the West, it shapes our education policies, it shapes our development visions and education visions, and we remain trapped in this colonial mindset. And it traps our ways of thinking and our frames of thinking, which have to be undone. So for decolonizing our minds here in Pakistan, I outlined a few problems in one of my works. I pointed out that if we have to decolonize our mind and our ways of thinking, we have to check our tendencies of binary thinking. This is again a colonial way of thinking, that you put things in binary, either this or that, either realism or liberalism, either good or bad. So this trap of binary thinking, we really have to think out of this and we have to think about other possibilities. Then we have to undo the instrumental thinking, which is again a type of thinking that the modern man or woman engages with. That we are not thinking about the purpose of things, we are just thinking about ways to achieve that purpose. So instrumental thinking is another type of thinking which is very common. We have to undo it in education, in higher education, in our universities. And then we have in Pakistan our all-time seduction of the West that trap our development and educational visions. So whenever we are planning something, we are building a vision for, our first question is, what is happening in the Ivy League universities? What is happening in the West? What is happening in the Western universities? Find out and just copy that. Sometime we think about how that will work in our context, but a lot of times we are not even doing that thinking and just uncritically adopting whatever trends are there in the West. So this uncritical adoption of the policies which are in trend in the West is a problem, and it has been a problem for quite some time, especially in Pakistan. So our mindsets are a very important site of decolonizing. And here, current systems of knowledge and knowledge production have a key role to play. If we intend to decolonize minds, we have to engage with the current systems of knowledge and knowledge production. So, where do we start? There is an extensive literature and some excellent pieces already written about decolonizing. There's ample literature, very rich, and we have to learn from that literature. From UK, we have Dion Musavi, who wrote about the dangers of joining the decolonial bandwagon. And then there is excellent work being done in South Africa for many years for decolonizing universities. In fact, the original Rhodes Must Fall movement began in the University of Cape Town. And since then, there have been excellent educational movement and a lot of work being done by the African scholars, and you have again South American scholars who are working in these lines. In East Asia, we have Professor Farid Alatas, who's working on these lines. So we can learn a lot from these works. The following ideas I share are taken from the literature that we must take. When we are talking about decolonizing, we must take this work, we must learn from this body of literature and then take this work forward. And so there's a lot that we can learn from this literature. So we need to know very clearly that decolonizing is a different line of work than diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI. DEI is again in vogue for quite some time, not now, after we have DEI work. We're seeing the problem that we're facing in America, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important line of work. A lot of our recommendations that I see in the current memo they relate to this line of thinking. It's very important, it's very crucial to engage with this kind of action. It's very much needed in Pakistan, but this is different from decolonizing. DEI is different from decolonizing. In diversity and inclusion work, the main difference is that the centrality of the white position remains intact. Others are just granted permission to add their voice in this canon. Decolonizing is about decentering the white academy and white voices, decentering. And in Pakistan, we must keep in mind that when we advocate decentering the dominant position, we should be ready and willing to decenter our own voices in our location in favor of those who are marginalized in our context. Now, coming to the specifics, when it comes to decolonizing knowledge, we need to acknowledge that universities have been an integral part of the colonial system in maintaining epistemic hegemony of the West, creating and maintaining this hegemony. So we have a book by Bhamra and et al. In 2018 book, which is called the Decolonizing the Universities. And they ask a crucial question. They ask if decolonizing is possible. Just a second. It's possible in a colonizing institution. Is a decolonizing education possible within the colonizing university? This is especially true for contemporary neoliberal universities. And neoliberal framework is really dominating the education policy vision, the HEC vision, which explicitly says that the purpose of education, higher education, is to create human capital for the economy. Now, this neoliberal framework, which really elevates economic frameworks over all other frameworks is a big problem, and there have been plenty of critique on neoliberal framework of education. But as for now, this framework is the dominant framework, and again, we are imitating from the West, and all our education policies are shaped in the neoliberal framework. So we really need to think about how is it possible to do the work of decolonizing within the contemporary neoliberal universities. It's a big question mark. I admire in the memo there are historical connections which are made by Dr. Mary Hunter. Especially, she mentions the Lord Macaulay's policy, and a lot of the problems that were created at that point in history, they remain just the same as of today, and these are the problems that we need to undo today in order to decolonize knowledge domain. For example, she talks about research funding, and I think research funding has remained political as of today. In my domain, I see, which is peace studies and security studies and international relations, I see how the funding agencies quite often represent the same institutions or the same governments or the same people who are instilling harm. They provide funds, and they are part of the process and the structure which continues to instill harm. So universities continue to value, the neoliberal universities would demand research funding. They would value your research when you're requiring funding. So this cycle continues till this day. Dr. Mary Hunter, she mentions how Macaulay talked about funding certain institutions and certain projects which are in the interest of the British Empire. In one way or the other, this funding being political, this system remains intact. So one way to dismantle the Western hegemony on producing knowledge is by turning Mignolo's concept of epistemic disobedience into a way of life. And we need to constantly ask, what is it that we call knowledge production? What knowledge is considered legitimate knowledge? Who decides that and why? For example, in my domain, it is so important today to ask these questions in security studies, in peace studies. It's so important to ask who is it that who defines that this is legitimate knowledge, or these are the definitions, or these are the terminologies that we have to use. We also need to ask people what silenced them, what mechanisms silence them, and many of them will be still in place. So also the following historical aspects mentioned in the draft, they remain the same. Dr. Hunter talks about the lack of solidarity among the local scholars was a condition which allowed the Western hegemony to be maintained and again constructed in the past. This unfortunately remains the same. We still have a lack of solidarity and lack of clarity about what we have to do. And this is one of the things we are trying to undo at the Pluriversity Forum. We are trying to reach out to the people. We are trying to build framework networks that are scholarly networks that can build the forums of solidarity. Again, English remains as a barrier. It's very much there. Extractivism continues, and we mentioned the British Council and we mentioned the O and A level. I have one of my own works just to tell this forum, which is talking about the O level Pakistan studies, how it is taught and what are the problems with that. So according to one source, this is a 2023 statistic that there were 42 billion rupees they will be transferred from Pakistan to UK only for the O-level exam. This is this statistic from 2023. So this level of extractivism continues. 42 billion for O-level exam only in 1 year. And this system is there. And I'm glad the policy memo is pointing towards that direction. So undoing all of this is creating conditions that can lead to decolonizing. And the memo also talks about decolonizing language. I think when we're talking about decolonizing language, we must think about what it entails. We must watch out for every word which is available in our dictionary, all the categories which are available. whatever we are writing and uttering, we have to be careful about those terms. So it is to be constantly struggling when we are talking about decolonizing language, and in my domain especially, we see that we have to struggle from the lack of options. We have to constantly find ourselves in a position that all the choices available have already been chosen for us. So refusing to be caught in the choices which are provided to us in the given system and creating alternatives is what decolonizing language should be about. We should have new words, new categories which really define our problems instead of really fighting or using the same language for our own liberation instead of using the language of the oppressor. So since, and this again remains a dilemma because we continue to speak in that language, we continue to, again, we know it's an important way of communicating, but at the same time, we know that English is much more than just a language in Pakistan. It is a status, and again, we remain restricted whenever we expressing ourselves in the language. So since decolonizing is about changing the terms of conversation, I would suggest we can have a conference, but one conference would not be enough because it's such a huge task. I would suggest a continuous and consistent dialogue. And let us sit with the Cambridge and Oxford graduates. And changing the terms means that we are talking to them at an equal level. They should come and sit with us. They should come and listen to us. They should come and engage with us at an equal level. Let us co-construct knowledge that is good for all of us. And let us not just be the consumers of the knowledge which is coming from the West. Let us co-construct knowledge. Let us co-construct futures in which the terms of our engagement is different. So it has to be a consistent and continuous dialogue, rather maybe just one conference or one sitting. We need a consistent dialogue. We have to build that on different terms, on which we are talking on equal terms. So let us keep decolonizing a verb. I really appreciate this emphasis of this policy memo. It has to be a verb. It has to be an action. And we must contemplate ways of resistance. We need more of this, more such events, more such conversations. And this is an urgent task at the current moment, not because we have a new buzzword to follow, but because we have no other choice at the current moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima, for your very comprehensive and thought-provoking insights. I was particularly stuck at the start of your remarks. You said, "Who are we without colonialism?" And it's in the absence of identity, the issue of identity, it's incredibly important. So it forces us to confront a fundamental issue: how deeply colonial frameworks have shaped not just our institution, but also our sense of self, history, and cultural belonging. And the fact that this question remains largely unaddressed in mainstream discourse.
So I think the last video is frozen. Faria, should I continue?
Yes, I think go for it, Dr. Waqas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I think I'll take it from here. I wouldn't say as much. I mean, Dr. Fatma Sajjad, I mean, what she said all kind of encompasses it all, and I can't really match a level of depth on the topic of decolonization. But I do have a couple of commentaries that I can make. So when you say decolonizing British-UK relationship, as Dr. Fatma said, it entails kind of reconfiguring and rethinking the whole epistemic and the epistemological and the material dimensions of what colonization has done to people across different societies. Um, but my contention here is that, yes, I do understand how the United Kingdom or the United States actively promote English and their knowledge structures as a way to, they show as if going to England for a degree or going to the United States for a degree or to any university in the English-speaking world to, actually do something good for you. But nobody enforces that on us. I mean, for instance, in Pakistan, it's not the United Kingdom saying that go to Cambridge and you will be valued. It is the Pakistani people saying, go to Cambridge and you'll be valued. It's the Pakistani neoliberal university that is setting that doctrine. And that is where Dr. Fatma Sajjad made such a very important observation that we are constantly in dialogue or in conversation with captive minds, people who simply do not understand how the Western way of doing is not the non-Western way of doing things. And they enforce certain ideas on us which are not congruent to the way, for instance, work happens, intellectual work happens in Pakistan. Having said that, when it comes to British-UK relationship, one of the most circulated texts is, of course, the syllabus that is rotated around the world through the CIE, the Cambridge International Examination System. And I wanted to, there was a research that we conducted in NUST on the IGCSE text on world history. So basically, why world history? Because in physics, chemistry, maths, business studies, you really don't feel that space where you can look at how political subjectivities are transferred onto the recipients. But when you look at the world history syllabus, I wanted to point out a couple of things here. So I'd probably read a paragraph that we did. Okay. So the core content of IGCSE Modern World History opens with the heading 20th Century International Relations since 1919, the year which is contestably identified as marking the end of empires. Typical configurations of IR take the post-World War II scenario as the starting point for explaining international politics, leading to the critical observation that in mainstream IR, they locate agency and history with the great powers. And within this entire talk about modern world history, we find no, for example, mention about the Badum Conference. We find no mention about the Arab League. We found no mention about the Organization of the African Union, which are very central to the non-Western world. At the same time, when you look at the texts, for example, that are displayed within that modern world history syllabus. So at one point, they say the land of the Iraq was invaded by the Arabs, and its people adopted the language Arabic and the religion Islam of the invaders. But a similar thing that would probably can be said about how colonialism did the same thing exactly. But you don't see that kind of mention about the British Empire or about what the British did. Then you have a mention of Saddam Hussein. As a young man, Saddam has been immersed in the anti-British, anti-Western atmosphere of the Arab world. But similar explicit mentions of the Western states' exploitative and subjugating behavior in the form of colonialism or in the form of their state policies towards non-Western states does not occur within this text. So the problem with the text is, so when you're saying decolonization, of course, it's a huge, big thing, the reconfiguration of the entire epistemic world that we live in. But in a specific context, Pakistan-UK relationship, where the CIE and the ONA levels play a very central role, because I do not find the British Council or the British higher education very involved in the Pakistani education structure. The way, for example, other German organizations like the HSF or like the USEF the way they are involved, I do not find British Criminal Council to be that involved in the tertiary higher education system in Pakistan. But I do find them very involved in the ONDA level. So one of my recommendations would be that if you're disseminating a course of CIE to, let's say, a Pakistani audience, would it not be prudent to incorporate, number one, the epistemic side of what they'd gone through, to give them a better awareness of their own history and their own subjugation, number one. Number two, would it not make sense that a syllabus of modern world history was written by people who are equally part of the non-Western world as well, so they can bring forward, as Dr. Fatima Sajjad said earlier, words matter, the way you say it matters, so maybe bring those subjectivities to the fore so that so what happens is that when students who do their O and A levels and they go into the university education system, automatically, the Western world is the center of their epistemic world. Because when O&A level syllabus, you've been informed time and time again that the Taliban and the mullah and the third world, it's in really bad condition. But you give no context within the modern world history about how colonialism actually created those epistemic conditions which have led to the inequalities that we suffer today. So I think that context, the dehistoricized, decontextualized syllabus of modern world history probably points to one very small dimension of how coloniality continues to perpetuate in our mindset and keeps Western world at the center of all modern world history. Whereas, to be fairly honest, the colonized world was equally a part of it. So that was one concern. Secondly, you've got research that has, and I've always wondered this, we've got research that debunks 1919 as a starting point of international relations. We've got research that debunks realism and liberalism ideas as ideas that are universalized because they were created for the exercise of the empire. And so why can't we incorporate those alternative perspectives within, our own episteme? So maybe decolonizing might take a very long time, but at least to begin with, we can always bring in all these, decolonial thoughts, these alternative ideas that have till as yet not shaped our. And then there is a question, actually. The question is, the state system all over the world, yes, true. It's a European construct, the way we exist in the world today. But how do you battle a state system that is enforced upon you by the powers? So the state managers are invested in protecting and consolidating the power structures within. How do you decolonize that thought? The entire security studies is premised on the maintenance of power. How do you decolonize that? I think we have a lot of questions when it comes to decolonizing. And somehow we think that decolonizing, I mean, to say, I think there's a problematic there as well, that when we're talking about decolonizing, we're actually talking about a system, an epistemic system, which was probably better. So if we decolonize, we will go to an indigenous system, which is better. And research has shown that those systems were actually not as good as they are, projected to be. So what would be a decolonized Pakistan, for instance? What would be a decolonized Pakistani knowledge system? I mean, these are huge questions. And I think the memo does a really good job in taking a first step towards that point. but I think it's a very long journey to actually conceptualize, think, and then operationalize those ideas into something more tangible, something more concrete. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. For your otherwise we'll continue to perpetuate coloniality in our mindsets, also reinforces the broader theme of today's discussion, that decolonization is not just about policy shift. So starting from Saira Baig, she has mentioned that colonialism uh,
I think, sorry, Dr. Waqas,
independence.
the internet's working. Talha, I'm afraid you're breaking up quite a lot, so I wonder if Zulfikar or Alia might be able to take over, just if their internet is working a little bit better, just with or I can do it, that's fine as well. I might quickly respond to the panelists first, and then I'll throw out some
I
of the
would
questions.
like to, sorry,
Alia.
interrupt you quickly. Hi, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Alia Naqvi, managing editor here at the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research. So Tala's getting stuck quite a bit. And yes, let's start off with Mary. Mary, would you like to very quickly make a few comments or just say something to, just have your perspective shared on the remarks of Dr. Fatima and Dr. Ahmed Waqas.
Thank you, Alia. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Bahut Shukriya to Dr. Fatima and Dr. Waqas as well. I really appreciate you both taking the time to join us today. And I've been fortunate to have taken part in Dr. Waqas's winter school with the Rhodes Initiative, so I was able to learn a lot from him about decolonisation and different scholars from around the world. And I think the points that they've highlighted go to show why it's really important to have this ongoing conversation with Pakistani scholars, not just with British scholars and researchers, but with the British government and with the British Council, so that they can be part of that process. And I think their point, which is really important, about how deep decolonisation is and how long it will take as a journey, is something that I tried to acknowledge within the memo by saying that what I can do is quite limited because I'm not a Pakistani. So my particular role in that respect, I can only achieve certain things. And I wanted to at least do what I could within my own work to maybe be part of that conversation and to hopefully at least bring people together through interactions and stuff. So that's what I'm hoping most of all with this, and hopefully it'll lead to some more positive conversations. But I really appreciate the time that they've taken. And if you haven't, to the audience members, if you haven't read their works, please do, because they're fascinating and really important works. So thank you so much again to both of the speakers.
Thank you, Mary. We'll take our first question. I'm just skimming through them, and we have quite a few remarks here as well. This one is for Dr. Fatma. In your recommendation, how can we do research in IR differently to incorporate differences, divisions, factionalism from the location of Pakistan? Please suggest books on research methodology to do alternative international relations. If this is something you would also want to get back to later, maybe we can exchange email addresses as well. But yes, please go ahead.
I can just go on. I can maybe very briefly respond to the questions because then I tend to forget. Okay, so yes, so I can again, what I can do is to welcome you on our forum, which is the Pluriversity Lahore, and Dr. Waqas is on board as well. And we are trying to again, I think we can begin by just the research should be driven by our very own problems, and we should be seeing our problems through our own lived experiences. So this can be the starting point, but again, like I said, it's a long journey. Like Dr. Waqas also said that it's not something very simple. There's a lot that we have to unpack, that we have to undo. If you're can I go in Urdu with the Pakistani audience? Okay. So हमने layers जो है ना वो अपने ऊपर से उतारनी है बहुत सारी. So that is not a very quick fix thing that you have a methodology book and you can get things. It is a continuous process. We have to keep thinking. So it's through action and reflection and a constant process of that we have to think about how do we research, why are we doing the research, and again, research should be a form of resistance, and it should really be focused on resolving the problems that we face and how we frame our problems. That is again another dimension. So it would not be a very simple thing. It needs a constant engagement and a constant reflection. So I can welcome you on the forum that we have. Dr. Waqas also has a forum of his own. So we can be in conversation. My email, I always love to respond to the emails that I receive. So, and I'm really thankful to Dr. Mary for starting this conversation and bringing attention to this. So again, I'm here to, if you have any research idea, I would love to discuss that with you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Fatima. Tala, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, my internet is acting up. So there is this question, very interesting question by Sarah. She has talked about, do we lack the agency that we have been unable, like even after 7 decades of independence, we are still talking about how we are still influenced by colonialism. So I'll sum up her question. She wonders whether we lack the agency to do so, and maybe we are shifting according the blame to our colonial overlords. And secondly, she has talked about how English, being an international language, all the nomenclature, all the discourses that we study, so they're all written in English language. So wouldn't Pakistan be left behind when even if we take their focus? The students focus from English and make them study in different languages. So anyone, Dr. Fatima, you or Dr. Ahmed, Waqas, Waheed, and Mary, also you feel free to chip in, any one of you.
So, okay, so whenever we talk about decolonizing, one of the first reactions or response we get is that we are blaming the West, which we are not, because we start by blaming ourselves and our captive mind. Like Dr. Waqas just pointed out, that it's not the British universities who are asking us to do what we are doing. So for me, one of the most important tasks of decolonizing in Pakistan is to undo the captive mind, which is the blind imitation of the West. And another thing is this anxiety that we are somehow lagging behind. Just think about it. Where are we heading? Lagging behind what? What is our idea of development? What is our vision of development? If it's the Western model of development, which is again being taught to us and which we have internalized, I think it's time that we can see that we are heading towards a climate disaster because of the capitalist model of development. And it's about time that we do, and it's very urgent to do a major rethinking about undoing, again, imagining other forms of living on Earth, just not because capitalism is really going in a direction, and with that fascism also, with that other disturbing trends as well. But we see things going in a very wrong direction. So it's really urgent that we think about our vision for future. The arrival of artificial intelligence and the speed at which it's going, that's another reason that we have to really do some good thinking about our vision of development, our vision for future. And that should be done collectively with the West. So we are not blaming the West, but definitely they have to be held into account. We cannot erase history when we are talking about future. So we have to really acknowledge that history and acknowledge all the again wrongdoings that have been done to us, and the ones that we carry with us, and we are not refusing to let go. So it's really not blaming the West. We really admire the work of a lot of Western scholars, and it is engaging with them on an equal level rather than just receiving knowledge from them. So it's changing the terms of that dialogue, not blaming them.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. And this addressed the question of Tausif Ahmed as well. Dr. Waqas, you want to add something?
Something what we suffer in Pakistan is not actually captive minds. I think we suffer from captive structures. Imagine, for example, when university managers ask you, so they happened to me some time ago, university managers came to me and they said, you are not producing impact research. And I asked them, what is impact research? And they said, in impact journals, you're not. And I started thinking, how many actually Pakistani academics would be publishing in impact journals where the dense English language, the dense English jargon, the academic English, if you, for instance, there was this journal that I actually once sent my manuscript to, and it was rejected because I did not meet the level of English proficiency that they had required for the journal. When people who are not academics or people who are not scholars, they have checklists and they start judging your scholarly output on those checklists, that becomes a problem. I think the problem is that we transform from a knowledge society into a knowledge economy. Before 1999, we had 17 universities in Pakistan. Now we have more than 270 universities in Pakistan. Who's going to manage those universities? Managers. How many managers know about social sciences? How many managers know about what is impactful research? How many managers are interested in thought? How many managers are interested in the contribution of your work towards the society? None. Your contributions are only evaluated on the basis of how you publish in impactful journals. That is about it. Even the Higher Education Commission, for instance, it places within its promotion criteria, it has, I've been informed, books, for example, writing books is not part of your promotion criteria. So for a tenure track professor, you have to publish 10 journal articles in 6 years. I went to Oxford University for a fellowship, and I told the same thing to to the dean, Kate Sullivan there. And I said, I asked her, I said, Kate, have you published 10 articles in 10 journal articles, impact articles in 6 years? She said, are you kidding? It's not possible. But yet here, the expectations are that somehow you're not just at parity with the neoliberal Western world, you're even better than them. For reasons I really don't know who fed them what. So it is not just captive minds, it is captive structures all over the way, whether it is the universities, whether it is the private schools, whether it is the organizations that you join, developmental activities. They are not captive minds, they're captive structures. So you're not battling one or two mindsets, you're battling a whole structure. So I think when you say things, when, for example, Sumera talked about, how are we going to do IR? I would ask her to go to the Higher Education Commission's website and look at the undergraduate course for international relations. So they have actually given a template of an undergraduate course outline for 4 years. And I would ask her, this is what we are required to teach. We don't have much leeway. That is why Dr. Fatima Sajjad had to start a pluriversity and I had to start a Rhodes Initiative. Because within the university, you really don't have that kind of space to navigate through alternative perspectives. Number one. Number two, I received a memo the other day that kindly all professors teach in English because we have international students who do not understand Urdu. I wish they said the same thing anywhere else. I mean, why, if I have to go to England and I have to learn English, and if I have to go to Germany and I have to learn German, and if I have to go to Sweden and I have to learn Swedish, and if I have to go to China, I have to learn Chinese, Cantonese, Mandarin, whatever, why can't people come to Pakistan to learn Urdu language or, even a dialect? I mean, why can't that be a requirement? So again, captive structures, not captive system, make us think in a certain way because it maintains the power structure through which they draw most of their authority. You dislodge this power structure, you dislodge their authority. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about the international relations, which I'm, I guess, very sensitive about.
Thank you so much. Hamraz, yes, we have Hamraz and Vaji who want to ask the question. Vaji, if you want to go ahead, you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And do also mention the name of the esteemed professors that we have with us, Dr. Waqas or Dr. Fatima or Dr. Mary Hunter, whom you are addressing your question to. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. I don't have a question. मेरा कोई सवाल नहीं है. I'm trying to make a point. बल्कि मैं एक बात वाजे करना चाहता हूँ उर्दू में कि माशाल्लाह डीकोलोनाइजेशन की बात हो रही है. सिर्फ एक खातून है, डॉक्टर मैरी हंटर. थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर कन्वर्सिंग एंड टेलिंग अस अबाउट योर थॉट्स. सिर्फ वो एक नेटिव अंग्रेजी बोलने वाली खातून है. पूरा का पूरा जो पाकिस्तान के अंदर ये चल रहा है, पार्टिसिपेंट जो हैं 23 पार्टिसिपेंट्स उर्दू बोलने वाले नेटिव स्पीकर हैं, नेटिव बातचीत करने वाले हैं. लेकिन हम ये सारी बात अंग्रेजी में कर रहे हैं. तो मैं बात ये करना चाह रहा हूँ कि छोटे छोटे कदम उठाने पड़ेंगे. हम अपनी बात उर्दू में वाज़े तौर पे कर सकेंगे तो ही हम सोच बदलेंगे. क्योंकि ये कोई सब्जेक्ट नहीं है, ये कोई सिलेबस नहीं है जिसको फॉलो करना है. और बस यही बात है. मैं एक पीएचडी का स्कॉलर हूँ और मैं डीकोलोनाइजेशन के ऊपर ही मेरा पूरा थीसिस है. उसके ऊपर अभी मैं काम कंप्लीट किया है. तो ये बात बहुत अहम है बार बार हाईलाइट करना कि हमें अपना सोच का स्टार्ट उर्दू से करना है. जो चीज़ हमारे दिमाग में आती है, अगर हम अंग्रेजी में सोचते हैं तो ये एक परेशानी की बात है. परेशानी की बात इसलिए कि हम अपनी नेटिव लैंग्वेज में नहीं सोच रहे. दिस इज द ओनली पॉइंट विच आई वांट टू मेक. एंड थैंक यू वेरी मच अगेन डॉक्टर मैरी. आई एम एक्सट्रीमली ग्रेटफुल फॉर picking up this thought and sharing your opinion with us. So grateful to you. Thank you.
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया वजी साहब. आपने बिल्कुल वजह फरमाया कि we only have one native English speaker in the audience, and the rest of us are born and bred here in Pakistan. Regrettably, the mode of the communication of this webinar is English. But yes, we need to do better. और
I'd just like to add कि मैरी जो है वो यहाँ पाकिस्तान आके काफी हद तक उर्दू सीख चुकी हैं. तो पता नहीं कितनी फ्लुएंट है, लेकिन ये कि आपसे अच्छी तरह सलाम दुआ तो कर लेंगी. तो ये एक अच्छी चीज है जो यहाँ आके हमने एटलीस्ट मैरी की अपनी कोशिश की अरुद से.
Thank you. So Hamraz wanted to ask a question. Hamraz, you can unmute yourself and आप जो है वो you can ask your question.
All right. Hi. Thank you very much, and thank you all the panelists for such wonderful talks. So my question, the word decoloniality is something that particularly that I struggle with, being an academic practitioner myself, I really struggle making a sense of the word. What kind of a practice is the decolonial one? Because the question is primarily for Dr. Hunter, but I would love if other panelists also want to share their thoughts. So it's mostly in the spirit of uh, what Dr. Waqas Waheed said in the later parts of his talk, and the other panelists as well. So when we talk about decolonization, we see that much of the decolonial work has to take place in the colonial space itself. Either it's a university, a classroom, or some academic journal or things like that. Whereas on the other hand, as Dr. Waqas Waheed numerously said that the colonialism is an entire very complex epistemic system of domination and captive structures. It has altered the entire way in which individuals and people around the world associate with their ecologies, with their ecosystems, with their life worlds. So we see there are a lot of native poets, native artists who are doing very brilliant work, which we can which we can think of as decolonial. But it is of no importance until some academic like me, who is educated in the English tastes, Western tastes, and a Western academy, takes up this task of writing a paper on that and telling others in what way those native works are decolonial. So in the same way, when we come to the title of this webinar, which is something which particularly got me interested, it's decolonizing UK-Pakistan relations. So we are talking about two nation states here. So nation state is something which I believe is the primary unit of consolidation of colonial structures and colonial legacies. So I would really like to ask. Now I understand, if you're doing your decolonial work in a specific context, you have to ignore other things. You cannot just engage with the entire question of academic decolonization. But I would like to ask here, if we are thinking of decolonization in state-to-state relations, at what point do we think that state ceases to be an active unit of domination, of colonial domination, ceases to be a captive structure itself? So that's what I'd like our panelists to deliberate. Thank you.
Very interesting question, Hamraz. And for those of you who don't know about Hamraz, he used to be our colleague, and he used to think about these questions quite a lot. And most of the work that he did at CSCR, it pertained to this critical examination of discourses related to development and security. So we are glad that Hamraz joined us today. And Hamraz has raised a very pertinent question. Yes, sir. Please, over to you.
I understand the trappings of a nation state, but then we've got 1947 as well. One of the reasons why the decolonizing happened and why the Third World was trapped in its territoriality was because it was scared that the empires might come back. And that was one reason why the idea of nation state was so readily and uncritically accepted by the Third World, because to be part of the world system, it became imperative to be a nation state. And that is why the right of self-determination and, other kinds of such important landmarks were infused into the United Nations as well, to formalize a system of nation state. But to be fairly honest, I don't mind a nation state. I think for a foreseeable future, at least, we might continue to stay within the nation state, and that will be our defining way of life. But I would like to I would like to have a historically indigenous idea of nation state. So normally, when I tell my students, I ask them about state sovereignty, for example, which is one of the pillars of the nation state, and we tell them that the idea of state sovereignty came from the Treaty of Westphalia, for example, or the Treaty of Augsburg, for example. Uh, but did that idea of state sovereignty for you and me come from Westphalia? No, it did not. The idea of our state sovereignty came from 1947. It did not come back, number one. Number two, the way state sovereignty is taught, in the Treaty of Westphalia, there's a lot of people who've actually debunked the entire idea. And they've spoken, for example, there's this guy, Osiander, and he talks about how the way state sovereignty was conceptualized later was to help the empires to actually, empires to stop interfering in each other's businesses. But that state sovereignty, when we start talking about state sovereignty, we don't indigenize it. We don't look at it from our way of how it operationalizes. Rather, we uncritically accept the Western-centric narrative of state sovereignty that starts from the Treaty of Westphalia. So I understand we can't dislodge the idea of nation state, not as yet, maybe later down the road. But at least we can problematize the idea of nation state. We can, for example, look at how from 1947 onwards, state sovereignty became a defining pillar of Pakistan, or how state sovereignty was operationalized or conceptualized, after 1947 by the state managers, and in there find a distinction between how different it is from the way it is practiced in the West. So that's my 2 cents about the nation state.
Thank you. I would like to add a bit of nuance here. When we were thinking about this memo, we were not looking at it from this broad. I mean, the focal point was cultural relations. We were looking at it from the perspective of cultural relations between both the countries. And apart from this, I defer to what Dr. Ahmed Waqas said. The idea of nation state, considering Pakistan in particular, where do we derive our thinking from? So that is quite contestable. What do we think we are as a nation state? Is it the same kind of nation state as was envisioned at the time of Westphalia or not? That is a big question mark. So we'll be
okay. Maybe I can add to this. I would agree with
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Waqas. I would totally agree with the session. But with that, I would like to have this freedom to imagine different possibilities for future. Let us have that freedom to imagine something different. While we agree that it's going to stay, maybe, but we don't know about the future, and we can always think about other ways. That imagination should remain free. That's my take on this.
Rightly so. So we are concluding this session now. I would like to acknowledge the remarks of each and everyone who has contributed in one form or another in the chat box. We have gone through your comments, but unfortunately, due to the paucity of time, we cannot further spend time on it. But we have read each and everything, and they are quite interesting comments. Hassan, Anisa, Kashif, Ali, Mirza Saab. Thank you to all of you. As we come to the end of this insightful discussion, my deepest gratitude to our esteemed panelists for their time, expertise, and valuable contributions to this conversation. Despite not feeling well, Dr. Ahmed Waqas Waheed was still kind enough to join us, and I truly appreciate his effort. It's always a learning experience spending time with him. And we also miss Dr. Mohammad Nadeem Mirza Saab, who unfortunately was unable to attend due to health reasons. We wish him a speedy recovery. Very special thank you to Dr. Mary Hunter, for her time in Pakistan and for her invaluable contributions to the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research. Her research has sparked important conversations on decolonization in UK-Pakistan cultural relations. And we hope that this work will continue to generate meaningful dialogue and action in the future. And perhaps the officials from British Council and FCDU who are attending this talk can take some pointers from it. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the entire CSCR team for their support throughout Mary's fellowship. In particular, a huge appreciation for Ms. Faria Iqtidar. She is the Islamabad Policy Group Coordinator, and it was her tireless efforts in managing all of Mary's academic commitments during her time here. Finally, thank you to all of you in the audience for your engagement, thoughtful questions, and participation. The recording of this webinar will be made available online, so please feel free to revisit it or share it with others on our YouTube page. Once the link will be uploaded there, once we'll upload it there, the link will be shared with you in the email. With that, we officially conclude today's session. Thank you all once again, and we look forward to continuing important conversations like this in the future. Take care and have a great day.